What's going on, everyone? I'm Tre Wilcox, and I'm here to show you how to work with some amazing meats from Cowboy Wagyu. Today, I've got some of our favorite and most popular cuts that are out here today. The New York strip steak, and of course we have our center cut filet. These are also two of my favorite cuts of meat because they're also very tender. I believe that the New York strip has just become one of the reigning champions of popularity. Two of the most tender cuts of meat that we have out there, and definitely two of the most popular with Cowboy Wagyu. Today I'm going to show you a really easy preparation for these steaks. Some of you may want to use a meat thermometer if you're not comfortable with kind of just using the finger method or the chef trick of just poking the meat. However, flavoring the meat is what I really want you to focus on the most. Brilliant cuts of meat, luxury style, great cost. You don't need to really fuss it up that much. I've got kosher salt, which is always really easy to see. It's really easy to feel in your fingertips, so it makes it difficult to over season. I've got cracked black pepper here too, and if you look at this cracked black pepper, it's actually a little bit more on the coarser side. I don't like the fine mist of black pepper. I almost want it as coarse as my kosher salt. I've got regular unsalted butter, and I've got a couple of aromatics here. I've got some rosemary, I've got some thyme, and I've got some garlic. The garlic cloves are definitely one of those things you want to have peeled already. You're going to need to smash them. Garlic's one of those kind of ingredients that when you don't break the skin, it's interesting, they don't have any flavor. It's when you break the skin with the back of a knife, now we got garlic. And so it's really interesting to know that you just need to just take these garlic cloves and just give them a little smash like that. This will help to release some of the flavors, because that's once we start cooking these steaks, we are going to add in some butter, the aromatics, and the garlic, and those begin to flavor this Wagyu steak with an amazing flavor. So we only need about, I would say, 10 or so garlic cloves per steak. If you're not a fan of the garlic, it's totally okay to omit that. However, I definitely feel like the herbs that you want to have, they need to be fresh. And if you're growing something different in your garden, whether it be sage or oregano, you can substitute those herbs. But today we're just going to work with fresh thyme and fresh rosemary. I've got about a 8 to 10 ounce filet here. I want to already have an oven preheated, okay? So I'm using a conventional oven, and I've turned the oven onto convection roast. I'm going to use 500 degrees, and remember, convection means that there's a little fan in the back of my oven blowing so that the heat circulates. Anytime you have heat in motion, it's always going to cook faster and hotter than it's just a regular bake. This filet is on a thicker side, so it's really important that you keep in mind that when a filet is this thick, you can't necessarily season the inside of it. So it's really important that you season heavily and aggressively on the outside, so that when you slice a nice thick piece of the steak across, you're actually going to get enough seasoning on the outside to suffice. So notice that I'm seasoning up on at least chest high with my arm, and I'm not doing this for show. This is literally because I want even distribution of the salt. If you ever get really close to a piece of meat and season really quickly, sometimes you get what we call salt spots, and you don't have even distribution. So move your fingers side to side, kind of rub them together, and then as I'm flipping this around in my hand, I'm actually kind of massaging the seasoning into the steak. I really think with a piece of meat this amazing, you don't need much more than that. You have to remember, we already have our garlic and our herbs as our aromatics to flavor the steak. I want to make sure that I've already got a pan on the stove preheating, and so that once I take this to my countertop, I'll be ready to start searing my steak and we can get this baby cooked. All right, so for my New York strip steak, I'm gonna wanna season this pretty aggressively as well. This New York strip steak seems to be around 10 ounces or so. It's a little on the thinner side, so I wanna make sure that I don't necessarily over season it, but I do wanna make sure it gets aggressive on the seasoning. Kosher salt, again, I'm using a pretty good height so that I get a nice even snow across the piece of meat. A little nice height. Cracked black pepper, since it's that nice coarse ground, you can see it, you can feel it, you can see it hitting the steak. Okay, I'm gonna flip this steak over, season my other side. Beautiful marbling in the steak. I've also allowed the steak to come up to about room temperature. You don't want to necessarily be pulling a piece of meat directly out of your refrigerator and putting it into a pan. Tempering the meat is what we call it in the restaurant or the chef world. Tempering the meat will just mean kind of letting that piece of steak come up to room temperature. Maybe 30 minutes or so on your counter. Covered if you feel like you need, uncovered would be fine as well. So this steak's ready to go into the pan. We don't need to roast this one in the oven because of the thinness of it. I think this will take about 2 to 3 minutes on each side. Have a perfect, delicious meat rare steak. I'm using a real high smoke temperature oil. It's called grapeseed oil. I'm using also a cast iron skillets. Are definitely gonna hold the heat really well. They're gonna stay hot longer. Grapeseed oil has the ability to come up to about 485 degrees so it won't catch on fire. Steak seasoned really nicely, goes right into the pan. You wanna allow it to sear for at least 30 seconds to a minute on each side. Every once in a while, if you wanted to lift up your steak and let the oil kind of run back underneath it, sometimes when you sear a piece of meat in the pan, you notice that the steak has a big ring around the outside and the center looks like it never touched. That's generally because there's not a thin layer of oil underneath it. So you just want to lift it up maybe once, twice, let the oil run back underneath it. It'll kind of help to make your sear look really awesome. So once I've got that nice sear on one side, I want to make sure that I turn it over and sear our steak on all sides. Give it that 31-minute love that it needs to kind of sear in that seasoning. And then we want to start working with our aromatics. Next thing we want to add, I want to go ahead and I'm going to add some garlic cloves. I'm going to add our unsalted butter. Okay. And then I want to add my herbs. Rosemary, thyme. These aromatics tend to pop a little bit. But we want to add those ingredients in. And then at this time, it's kind of one of those moments when we can switch to a spoon. That butter begins to instantly brown. Yeah. And then we can kind of baste our meat on all sides. Oh yeah, that looks nice. So this piece of meat, we're actually going to finish in the oven. This piece of meat's thick enough that we can roast it in the oven for about 6 to 7 minutes. Turn it over one time in between the cooking time, and we should have a perfect mid-rare steak, which will need to cook up to about 135 degrees. All right, so for our newer strip steak, it's really nice hot pan. I'm gonna go in with some grapeseed oil. And grapeseed oil has a real high smoke point, so it's not gonna catch on fire. Some people realize real fast that their pans aren't hot enough because the meat doesn't sear when it actually goes in the pan. This is what a hot pan looks like. You wanna see a little bit of smoke rolling from it. I'm using some really nice cast iron skillets. But now my steak, it's really nice and tempered. Almost room temperature steak goes into the pan. Really important step to not skip over. I do wanna sear my steaks on about 30 seconds on each side before I start adding my aromatics and my butter. You wanna be real careful when you flip the steak over, make sure you're not splashing. I always turn away from myself so that if I do hit the oil, it doesn't come onto me. So not this way, but turn away from yourself. So now that's kind of what we're looking for on our sear. We got that really nice, good sear on our steak, nice brown caramelization. So I want to go ahead and start to work quickly with our aromatics. Unsalted butter, we want to go ahead and get that into the pan. Our garlic cloves, so I want to make sure I get some of those directly into that butter. And give it a quick second, take that garlic, you'll notice it'll start to brown really fast on you. We're not going to use this garlic for anything more than aromatics, so don't be alarmed if it starts to get a little brown. I want to go ahead and baste that steak a couple of times, flip it over one more good time, add our aromatics. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and also kill the heat. And if I turn off my heat at this time, the residual heat of this pan will finish the steak. It's real important that we don't overcook this beautiful piece of meat. After you baste the steak a couple of times with those herbs, this baby is done. Take this steak out of the pan and put it somewhere where it can rest, whether it be on your cutting board. I like to use little paper towels and put it on my cutting board. And it does need to rest for at least 2 to 3 minutes before you slice it. But now that my steak is done and it's been rested properly, I know all the juices will stay within this piece of meat. I'm serving it with some really simple nice thyme roasted mushrooms. I'm just a big fan of that steak and mushroom combination. I feel like that's all you need. The Cowboy Wagyu strip steak is promised to deliver. It's just got amazing marbling and it's got some depth of flavor that'll knock your socks off. So enjoy making this one and definitely enjoy eating it. So it smells absolutely amazing in here. I took it out of the oven and placed it on a paper towel. Just let it rest for about 2 to 3 minutes. So our cowboy filet is done. Should be one of the most tender pieces of meat you've ever put in your mouth. Let's take a look on the inside and see how beautiful the steak is. Oh man. I am seeing some marbling up in here. Already you can just see the marbling and the deliciousness that the steak is going to have inside of it. I gotta say, it's one of those pieces of meat that truly is just the king of all cuts. I've chosen to serve it with some sweet potatoes that I've candied with a little bit of brown sugar, touch of cinnamon and salt, and just finished it with some pumpkin seeds and almonds. So hopefully you've enjoyed how to prepare this wonderful piece of meat, and I definitely look forward to hearing what you think about the flavor and the texture of this beautiful Cowboy Wagyu filet.